All right, hello everybody. We're going to do Lab 11, Circulatory System, uh, Part 1. It says, I think it's the only part for Circulatory System because Lab 12 is Respiratory System, blood and heart. And so if we start at the objectives, I have this pulled up on my computer. I'm going to fill in the complete lab book. I suggest you take your lab books out and fill out this material with me. This way we could be all set when it comes to the lab exam. You could use your lab books and it'll make it a lot easier. All right. So some of the objectives, let's look, identify the structures and understand the functions of the blood. So we'll do that first. That's going to include a blood typing video that I'm going to provide that you'll use to fill out that part of the lab book. That's probably the only part of the lab book I won't fill out for you, and you'll have to do that independently, but it'll be real easy once you see the instructional video. Identify the parts of the mammalian heart and trace the blood through it. And then, of course, learn the major blood vessels of the human body. So we'll take a look at all of those things. First thing we should do is look at the lab atlas and see what kind of information we have in there. And with this lab, it starts out with a blood smear. Blood smear is something that we've seen before. This is not the first time you're seeing this. We looked at these when we were doing, I think it was the second lab, when we were making hypertonic, isotonic, and hypotonic solutions. We were looking at these blood smears, making our own. And when we look at a typical blood smear, what do we see? Well, for the most part, we see red blood cells. And we also, we see some white blood cells in here. These are all red blood cells. There's a white blood cell here. And they kind of stand out. They're usually a different color. Usually they appear purple, light background, maybe red, but they're usually easy to find. And then we have these little fragments of cells in here. These are called platelets. There's some more up here. They're not whole cells. They're actually broken down pieces of a much larger cell called megakaryocyte. And then all this white stuff is the plasma of the blood. That's the liquid portion of the blood. All right. Here's a model of the heart that we would have on our lab tables if we were there. And of course, this outer membrane is a serous membrane. So this is a visceral serous membrane that surrounds the entire heart, protecting the heart, providing it with lubrications, I guess. This is called the pericardium. Remember, peri usually means outside, right? So it's no surprise that we find the pericardium lining the outer area of the heart. Right here we have the left atrium, and that leads us down to the left ventricle here, and you can see there's a valve that separates them, and in that valve we have these extensions that come down. These are small tendons called the chordae tendineae, and they attach to muscles down here deep in the left ventricle. Also the right ventricle, these are called papillary muscles, and they prevent that valve from shooting up backwards, inverting in on itself. Over here we have the right atrium, and then the right ventricle. And then we have this thick muscular wall that separates the left ventricle from the right ventricle. And not only are we separating ventricles here, but we're also keeping the blood separated. Remember, the left side of the heart receives and sends out oxygenated blood, and the right side of the heart receives and sends out deoxygenated blood. We do not want these two bloods mixing. So the septum here, the interventricular septum, prevents that from happening. And then, of course, everywhere we see muscle in the walls of the heart, well, we call that the myocardium. All right, so this is a model. This is a real thing. All right, so right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. You can see this size difference between the right ventricle and the left ventricle. The left ventricle is much larger. The walls are much thicker because all of this muscle is pumping blood to the entire body. Where all the right side of the heart doesn't need to be as large, doesn't need to be as strong because it's only pumping deoxygenated blood right next door to the lungs. And here we see that septum again. All right. If we look at some of the blood vessels of the heart, we have the superior vena cava. That's going to drain deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. Remember, the colors go for blue is for deoxygenated blood. Red is for oxygenated blood. It's not blue for veins and red for arteries. Don't make that mistake. Blue always means deoxygenated. And here we see the superior vena cava brings deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. This is the aorta. This is taking oxygenated blood from the left side of the heart, the left ventricle, and it's going to feed the entire body. Up here, this is the most anterior blood vessel in the heart. This is the one that's always right out in front. And this is the pulmonary trunk. Well, the pulmonary trunk splits into two ways, forming the pulmonary arteries, the left and the right pulmonary artery. And then the blood goes to the lungs, becomes oxygenated, and then the blood comes back to the lungs via the pulmonary veins. We have two from the right, and then we have two from the left coming back from the lungs. Then the heart itself has its own blood supply, right, through the coronary arteries, and the coronary arteries are connected directly to the aorta. And the coronary arteries supply this muscle tissue with blood. And then, of course, the blood drains back, deoxygenated from the muscles of the heart through the coronary veins. If we take a look on the inside, we have the left AV valve, the right AV valve. Remember, they have chordae tendineae associated with them, and the chordae tendineae attach deeper in the ventricles at these papillary muscles down below. All right, so what else do we have? We have a valve in here. This is the aortic valve, and then we have, and this is between the left ventricle and the aorta, and between the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk or the pulmonary arteries, we have the pulmonary valve. This is a model that would normally be in the lab room. And what this is it's showing you, it's comparing the difference between veins and arteries. So here we see a vein coming down and splitting in two smaller veins here. And in the middle, we see this artery. So these two on the sides are veins, and then this one in the middle is an artery. If we look at the walls, we can see the arteries have much thicker walls made of smooth muscle. And if we compare the lumen size of an artery is smaller, where if we look over here at the veins, the lumen is larger. The muscular walls are thinner. But another thing that veins have that arteries do not have are these valves. And the reason why arteries don't have valves is because they are closer to the heart. They have enough blood pressure pushing blood through. They don't need to rely on valves. But remember, from the arteries, blood will enter into smaller arteries called arterioles, and then eventually they'll flow through capillary beds. And that's where materials are going to be exchanged between the blood and the body's tissues. From there, they drain into venules and then larger veins. But by the time they drain into the veins, there's not a lot of blood pressure behind them. So we have to rely on other methods to transport the blood back up to the heart. And that's where the valves come in. Remember, valves prevent the backward flow of blood. So when we move around, we move our muscles around, we squeeze the veins, and it sends the blood through the veins. It helps to transport the blood through the veins when we use our muscles and squeeze the veins as a result of contracting our muscles, sending the blood in one direction. This is another angle. This looks like a cross section here. And on the top, we have an artery. Again, smaller lumen, but thicker wall, right? Thicker muscular wall, smaller lumen. The vein has a much larger lumen, right? This is a model that would be in the lab room also. And this is organized by So all the blue ones pretty much are carrying deoxygenated blood, and they are labeled here. So starting with the jugular, that's going to be draining deoxygenated blood from your head and neck down. And this is paired with the carotid. So if it's draining blood from the head and neck, well, what's supplying blood to the head and neck? Well, that's the carotids, right? And they're both found in that neck area. Subclavian vein on this side, subclavian artery on the other side. One is draining blood, one is sending blood. Brachial veins in the upper arm, brachial arteries. Pulmonary artery, now this is the only exception to the rule that this one is going to be blue. This is the only artery that's blue, because blue and red don't really apply for arteries and veins. They apply for oxygenated or deoxygenated. So you can see the pulmonary artery, even though it's an artery, it's still colored blue. So we still put this on the blue side. Pulmonary vein. Renal veins bringing blood into the kidneys. Renal arteries bringing blood into the kidneys. Renal veins draining blood from the kidneys. The vena cava, well, this is a vena cava. This is also the vena cava. This is the superior vena cava. This is the inferior vena cava. This drains blood from the lower parts into the right atrium. And then the aorta. In the hip region, we have the iliac vein that drains blood back to the heart, back to the inferior vena cava. The iliac artery takes blood from the aorta and sends it down to the legs, where we see the femoral veins and femoral arteries. All right, so this is pretty straightforward. The femoral veins drain blood. Femoral arteries bring blood to the legs, to the leg regions, hip regions, right? The vena cava to the entire lower body. The inferior vena cava, that is, superior vena cava, the entire body, right? The upper parts of the body, the arms, the shoulders, the head, the neck. All right. Subclavian, that's shoulder area. Brachial is upper arm, head and neck. All right. So this is pretty straightforward. I don't think you'll have any problems with that. And that's about it, right? Moving on. Let's go back to the lab. All right, what does it say here? We have types of blood cells. If we look at the size, we compare the size. The smallest ones would be the platelets. And then a little bit bigger than the platelets, roughly about 7 to 8 micrometers are the red blood cells. But if we compare the numbers, the red blood cells outnumber everything else by a lot, about 5 million per microliter, compared to 5 to 10,000 white blood cells, or 150,000 or 400,000 platelets. All right. So describe the structure and the color of these. Well, we could probably draw this. If I was to draw a red blood cell, I'd try to do like a circle with like a little indentation in it, not like a donut, but like an indent. And I would describe these as, let's see here. What can we say here? These are biconcave disc shapes. And what is the function of these? What can we say here? Well, they carry oxygen. If we go to white blood cells, we could draw these, or draw these a little bit differently. These tend to have a, I'm in the wrong thing here. I want to draw. These tend to have a lighter cell membrane, and then sometimes we have a nice normal looking nucleus like this. This would be consistent with something like lymphocytes, like B cells or T cells. But then we have pretty different looking larger white blood cells, like something that might look like this. that have pretty unique looking nuclei. A nucleus that might look, it might even look like it has more than one nucleus, but really it is only one. Sometimes these are referred to as PMNs, meaning morphonucleotides. Sometimes we even see little granules on the surface here. There's a couple different varieties. So we have granulocytes, and then the ones that do not have granules, we refer to those as agranulocytes. But what can we say here? Yeah, so we could say we have lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are involved in specific immune responses. So these are B cells that are producing antibodies against specific invaders. And then we have granulocytes. Granulocytes would be things like eosinophils, basophils, neutrophils are another example. We don't have to write all the examples in, but what is the function? What is the function of white blood cells? That's kind of important. The function of white blood cells is to fight off pathogens, right? Or we could say protect from disease. Spelled these wrong. I always spell everything wrong. And then, of course, we have platelets. Well, platelets, if we draw them, we could try to draw these guys. We're not really drawing cells, though. We're drawing like fragments of cells, right? Let's pick a different color. So they're more like little pieces of what used to be cells. And of course, these are going to be producing blood clots, right? Remember, thrombocytes stop bleeding when you're bleeding, right? They go through some type of enzymatic reaction where they produce fibers, and these fibers latch onto red blood cells and they create a dam, and that stops the bleeding. Produces blood clots. And what is the blood plasma? What is its function? Well, the blood plasma is the liquid portion of the blood. And of course, this is what's transporting move this down here. Cells and the materials of the blood. Include oxygen, nutrients, waste products, all that. All right. Moving on. All right, blood typing. The blood typing exercise that we would normally do in class, I'm going to show you a video, and you're going to watch that video, and you're going to use that video to fill out. In the video, there's a couple different samples. What I want you to do is fill this out using the sample for Mary. So put Mary in there and then watch the video, and then you could fill out if her agglutinates, then you're going to say, yeah, it clotted, or if it doesn't, then you're going to say no. And then you're going to do the rest. You'll see in the video, she's going to do the same exact thing, and you shouldn't have any problem with that. So let's keep going. You're going to use the lab atlas to fill this out. So you're going to draw what we just looked at. You're going to label the red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and the plasma. Be sure to fill this out. This a blood smear is always going to be done on high power. I'm not going to ask you to estimate the sizes of anything because everything's kind of too small, and the sizes are already provided on the first page of the labs. I already told you that the red blood cells are between 5 and 7 micrometers large, so no need to do that. So just skip the notes for now. Just fill in the lenses and the total magnification, and do the drawings and labelings. All right, so find the following structures on the heart model, and then we'll do the descriptions. So the pericardium, we're going to say, is a serous membrane surrounding the heart. And the myocardium, we're going to say, is the muscular portion of the heart. So in other words, that's the walls, muscular walls of the heart. All right, so we could do this. This is the left atrium. I'm going to abbreviate. This is the left ventricle. Oh my goodness, come on. Over here we have the right atrium. Get me this. There we go. Now we have the right ventricle. And this area in here is the wall that separates the two ventricles. And of course that, why is this not working? Is the septum. Right, so a couple of rules when we talk about ventricles. We could say that the ventricles are sending chambers. So let's say the same thing down here. Where the atria are going to be the receiving chambers. And how do they differ, though? How does the left ventricle differ from the right ventricle? Well, what are they sending? Well, if we look at the left ventricle, it's written in red, so that tells me something. That tells me that it's going to be sending oxygenated blood. So I'm going to add that. Oxygenated blood sending chambers. I wonder if I could copy this. No. All right. And then over here, this is a deoxygenated blood sending chamber. These are the receiving chambers, while the left atrium receives oxygenated blood. left atrium does. And then the right atrium receives deoxygenated blood. Oh, why did that turn? I want that red. And then the septum, of course, we're going to say separates oxy blood from deoxy blood. We're going to abbreviate oxy for oxygenated and deoxy for deoxygenated. All right. I think that's pretty good. Now we could get into more specifics, like where does the left ventricle send oxygenated blood? Well, it sends it through the aorta to the entire body. I guess we could add that. Let's go purple. Where does the right ventricle send deoxygenated blood? Well, to the lungs. Where is the left atrium receiving oxygenated blood from? The lungs. Where's the right atrium receiving deoxygenated blood from? Well, from the body. Oh, I forgot the F. Oh, somehow I ended up over there. Perfect. All right, moving on. So we have our chambers labeled here. Over here in the drawing on the right, they're showing us the major blood vessels coming off of the heart. So what we can do is we can label those. I told you when you're looking at the heart, the most anterior blood vessel is going to be the pulmonary trunk, which then divides into the pulmonary artery. Right. Up here we have the aorta. Over here we have the superior vena cava. And this drains deoxygenated blood from the upper parts of the body into the right atrium. And then we have over here, we're looking at a few, it looks like two of the four pulmonary veins. This is a coronary artery. And the cardiac vein. Coronary arteries feed the myocardium with oxygenated blood, where the cardiac veins drain the deoxygenated blood away from the myocardium or the walls of the ventricles. All right, so the aorta, what does the aorta do? Well, that supplies the entire body with oxygenated blood. The pulmonary arteries are going to send deoxy blood from the heart to the lungs. Pulmonary veins are going to take that blood that has just become oxygenated in the lungs and send it back to the heart. The vena cava drain deoxy blood from the entire body into the heart, to the right atrium. And of course, the superior vena cava is draining blood from the upper body, where the inferior vena cava is draining blood back up to the heart from the lower body. Right? Coronary arteries, cardiac veins supply the myocardium with oxygenated blood. I forgot the O there. Where the cardiac veins drain deoxy blood from the myocardium. Moving along. All right, so here we have the major valves of the heart, including the left and right AV valves, the pulmonary and aortic semilunar valves. They're labeled for us. And what can we say here? We're going to say the same thing for all the valves. What's the function of any valve? They prevent the backflow of blood, right? That's what they do. Say that for all of them. All right, cool. Oh, all right. So this is a nice practice page for labeling all the different components here. And let's see if we could do this here. Let's see. Let's reduce the size here. All right. Why don't we go starting from the top? We'll go down. We'll go clockwise. That's the aorta. This is the pulmonary trunk, which is really the beginning segment of the pulmonary artery. These are pulmonary veins. This is the superior vena cava. We don't see the inferior vena cava. It's not part of the model, or it's being blocked by this area over here. So let's write that down. And here we have our 4 chambers, including the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. The superior vena cava again. Come on. And then we have the different valves. Over here, this is the left AV valve. This is the septum. This is the right AV valve. This is the pulmonic valve. Oh, no, never mind. This is the inferior vena cava, excuse me. Okay, so the inferior vena cava is draining blood from the lower part. So this is the right atrium here, right? So there's 2 blood vessels that allow blood to be drained into the right atrium. This is the inferior vena cava, taking blood from the lower body parts. And then this is the superior vena cava, draining blood from the upper body parts. So we don't see the pulmonic valve in this picture. It's right here, though, however. We do see it here. Pulmonary valve. Over here, we see the aortic valve. Answering these summary questions. What is the myocardium? This is the muscle portion of the heart. The muscle of the heart is made up of which type of muscle tissue? Well, of course, this is cardiac muscle. Four chambers. We got, what do we got? Right atrium. Right ventricle. Then we got left ventricle. And we got left atrium. Perfect. Blood receiving chambers are called what? What are the blood receiving? They're at the top. They are the atria. Atria is plural, remember? And atrium is singular. The sending chambers or the pumping chambers are going to be called the ventricles. Which heart chamber has the thickest myocardium and why? Well, this is going to be the left ventricle. And this is because it has the hardest job, right? Because when the right ventricle is pumping blood only next door to the lungs, the left ventricle has the job sending blood to the entire body, up to the head, all the way down to the feet. It's a bigger job, so it has to be bigger. It needs to be the bigger of the two pumps. Side of the heart carries oxygen-rich blood. Well, this is going to be the left side here, right? The left side. And which side of the heart carries oxygen less? Well, this is the right side. The right side. Arteries start from where? Where do they start from? Well, the aorta is the major artery, and that's attached to the left ventricle, and all the other arteries come off of that. So the arteries start from ventricles. Arteries carry blood, A for artery, A for away, right? That's the true definition of an artery. If it brings blood away from the heart, not if it carries oxygenated blood, but if it brings blood away. Veins go to the heart. Veins bring the blood back to the atria. To which chamber of the heart is the aorta connected? Well, this is the left ventricle. To which chamber of the heart is the superior and inferior vena cava connected? Well, this is the right atrium. What chamber of the heart is the pulmonary artery connected? Well, the right ventricle takes the deoxygenated blood and sends it away to the lungs. So this is the right ventricle. And pulmonary veins are coming back from the lungs, connecting to the left atrium. All right. So up here again, this is practice. If you want to do this now, you can do it now. If you want to wait and do it later, but we've already done this, so I'm not going to do it again. I'm not sure if we did this one, but this is the aortic valve right here. There we go. And then this is the right AV valve. These are the chambers, so right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle, septum. Left AV valve. All right. Do some more of this here. What are the two types of circulations? Good question. Well, you have to remember that the right side of the heart takes deoxygenated blood and sends it to the lungs. And then that blood comes back to the heart. We call that pulmonary circulation. The left side of the heart receives the oxygenated blood from the lungs and sends it to the body's tissues, and then it comes back to the heart. And that type of circulation we call systemic circulation. When we're feeding the body's systems, it's systemic circulation. This is asking, what is the purpose of pulmonary circuit? Well, what are we going to say here? Well, to oxygenate the blood. And what is the purpose of the systemic circuit? To send oxy blood out to the tissues, right? Me. Pulmonary circulation carries blood between the heart and the lungs. And systemic circulation carries blood between the heart and the body systems. The aorta carries blood to the body. Which chamber of the heart pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs? That's the right ventricle. Which chamber of the heart receives? Well, the receiving chamber is at the top, so I know this is going to be an atrium. Oxygenated blood is going to be the left atrium. The left side of the heart always handles oxygenated blood. Which chamber of the heart pumps? So I know it's going to be a ventricle if it's sending oxygenated. So that's the left side out for systemic circulation. Which chamber of the blood receives? I know it's an atrium. Deoxygenated, I know it's on the right side. Blood vessel which drains deoxygenated part. Oh, it sounds like this from the upper body parts. It sounds like the superior vena cava. And the blood vessel that drains deoxygenated blood from the lower. Well, this sounds like the inferior vena cava. I'm going to abbreviate. What function do valves have? If I had $1 for every time we said this. Prevent backflow of blood. All arteries carry oxygen rich blood. Is that true? No, that is not true. All our arteries carry oxygenated blood, except for which one? Pulmonary artery. That's the exception, which carries deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs. All veins carry deoxygenated blood. That's not true, because the exception is pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein carries oxygen-rich blood from the lungs back to the heart. Right? Very good. Moving on here. What do we have to do here? Use arrow marks to show the direction of the flow of blood. All right. Well, where do we want to start? Let's start in the vena cava. We don't really know if this is the superior vena cava or not, so we'll just say this is one of the two vena cava. And the blood is coming here up, and it's going to drain into the right atrium. This is deoxygenated blood, so the right ventricle is going to accept that blood and send it to the lungs. And of course, what is this blood vessel going to be? This is the pulmonary. A for away from the heart. A for artery. It's in the lungs that we have gases being exchanged. So the blood will lose carbon dioxide, but it'll gain oxygen. And the pulmonary veins will take that oxygenated blood and send it back into the left atrium. From the left atrium, we're going to go into the left ventricle. The left ventricle is going to send that blood out the aorta. And the aorta is going to feed all the body systems except the lungs. So here we go. And then, of course, we're going to have gases being exchanged again. The oxygen is going to go to the tissues, where the tissues are going to bring carbon dioxide back into the blood. And then this blood is going to go right back. And the whole process starts all over again. All right, so we have two loops here. We have the pulmonary loop on the right side, and we have the systemic loop, or the systemic circulation happening on the left side. Okay. The red blood vessels are the coronary arteries, right? The blue ones are the cardiac veins. If these blood vessels get clogged somehow with fatty deposits, well, the result of that would be a heart attack, right? Or myocardial infarction, they call that down here. The type of blood vessels connecting coronary arteries and cardiac veins. So what connects these two? Well, these are called capillaries, right? That's the job of capillaries, to connect arteries to veins. And this is called a heart attack. Blood flow to part of the heart is being blocked for a long enough period of time that the muscles begin to die. Here's a good picture of the pericardium. So this is a visceral serous membrane, so that produces fluids. All right. This is a sheep's heart, by the way. This is labeled nicely. Remember when I told you the most anterior blood vessel, the one that sticks out of the top, that is most in front, is the pulmonary artery. The large one right behind that is the aorta. You can see the much larger, thicker left ventricle compared to the much smaller, thinner walls of the right ventricle. And this you could do on your own. Remember, this diagram I showed you is also in the lab atlas. So, for example, the jugular vein and the carotid arteries, when I look at this model, I could see that the blood is being drained from or supplied to the head and neck, right? So that's what I'm going to write. Supplies blood, head, neck. And do that for all of these. And we're going to skip that part for now. What is blood pressure? This is the pressure that is put on the walls of arteries from the left ventricle. Contraction of the left ventricle. The name of the instrument used to measure blood pressure. Well, this is a blood pressure cuff. That's what it's commonly called. Its actual name is called, oh boy, I'm not going to spell this right. Sphygmomanometer, believe it or not. Did I spell that right? I think I did. I don't know. Sphygmomanometer. Let's make that bigger. Yeah, there we go. That's better. But people call it a blood pressure cuff or a sphig for short. What is normal blood pressure? Well, anything over around 120 over 80, 110, 70, something like that. What do the top numbers mean? And the bottom numbers mean. The top number is the systolic. So this is the systolic is when the ventricle contracting. And the bottom number is the pressure being put on the walls of the arteries when the ventricles are relaxed. Anything that can increase your blood pressure? Many things. Diet, drugs, alcohol, stress, and many other things, right? All right, I think we're pretty good here. This is a model that normally we would have out in class, but just showing you the different veins here. It's not important for this. I'm not going to ask anything on the lab exam for that page. Okay, so a couple independent things you got to do. Fill out this chart. Watch the video on how to do the blood typing and fill out that part because I am going to ask questions about the blood typing on the lab exam. And that's pretty much it. Did we forget this question here? I think I skipped over this one. The aorta carries blood to the whole body. There we go. All right. I think we're good. And I hope you guys are doing well. And I don't know. I don't think we're going to see each other again this semester, but maybe. I don't know. I hope so. I prefer seeing you in person. I think you guys are a fun class. And but hopefully we could continue this semester and it'll be a success for all of us, right? Okay, carry on, and I'll see you soon.